It's very, very hard to talk to a camera. It makes it so impersonal. It affects me. This isn't how I speak to my friends when I'm sitting down talking to them. But I do consider you a friend. So I'm going to try and just relax a bit. Don't think that I'm anti-philosophy. Sometimes I have gasped at the genius of some philosophers. I love Socrates. I love Schopenhauer, Michel de Montaigne, Bertrand Russell. Descartes, Kant. All of these people and many others said things which I found breathtaking. But in the course of reading their books, I found that their great contribution to my mind could be summarized in a sentence or two, perhaps a paragraph. Yet I had to go through a whole book to find these pearls. So I'm not against philosophy. Philosophy is second on my list of great tools for understanding reality. Science obviously comes first. Now, there's a number of bones of contention between us which will never be resolved, I don't think, because you think in a philosophical way, and I do think in a scientific way. At least I hope I do. So let's get down to those bones. I suppose where I want to start is the idea that the first scientists in the Renaissance were religious men. In a world that's dominated by religion, you would expect that to be the case. But I would also point out that the Renaissance scientists did not ask questions, or not merely ask questions. They were not allowed or encouraged to ask questions. They dared to ask questions, and quite often they needed someone extremely powerful protecting them to allow them to ask questions. The thing that you should note, to my mind, is not that they were religious men, because as I say, in a religious time you would expect those questions to come from religious men, because everyone was religious. What you should ask is, where were they for 1500 years? The Greeks were doing just great. They were the first culture, as far as I'm aware, to dump the idea of gods and look for naturalistic answers to questions. And as soon as they dumped the idea of gods, they were able to answer the questions. Up until that point, no civilization had really been able to get to grips with some of those questions. What stopped them? I mean, even though Galileo and Kepler had people protecting them, they still ended up in trouble. They still had to guard what they said. Galileo was not shown a pair of thumbscrews to encourage him to inquire about science. Copernicus's books were not burned and banned to promote knowledge and thought. Religion does not have a dogmatic component. If I had children, I would not tell them what to think. I would try to teach them how to think. You say, perhaps things would be different if people were educated better. Well, you're living in America, and your schools are at the moment under attack from religion. The education system is under attack, and you know it. So if you think that religion is going to oversee a higher standard of education, you are very wrong. Aristotle and Plato are not high on my list of philosophers. They had contributions, and for men of their times, they had exceptional minds. They seem to think, especially in the case of Plato, that you could sit down and think about something and come to an answer. They didn't like experiment. Experiment is a vital part of testing whether what you're saying is correct or not. Plato, in essence, said, you don't need to experiment, you just need to think. That's kind of religious, and that's why Christianity adopted Plato as their, and Aristotle, as their philosophers of choice, because it didn't allow for experimentation. So in other words, you can think what you like, but you're not going to answer your question, so you may as well think God did it. Is there a literal definition of the word supernatural? I don't think it's a purely scientific definition. I do think it's a literal definition of the word supernatural. That is to say, anything which occurs which is outside of nature, not part of nature. To me, there is nothing that is not part of nature. That which is unexplained, when it is eventually explained, if it could be eventually explained, that explanation, according to my worldview, would be wholly natural. Anything. And by natural, I mean, to me, a psychological answer is quite natural. But it's not necessarily scientific, although it may be verifiable to some extent. But where people are concerned, there'll always be one exception. Now, with science, that takes it outside of science, really. Science is about repeatability. Where people are concerned, there is no repeatability. Everybody's different. But the fact is that that which we cannot explain scientifically, for the most part, seems to have a psychological explanation. I've had evidence of this in my own life. I have seen people swear they've seen a bat, when actually what they saw was a coffee jar spilling stones. And I know, because I was the one spilling the coffee jar with the stones. It's in a video I did called Proof of the Supernatural, or 30 Pebbles, Proof of the Paranormal, or 30 Pebbles on a Greenhouse Roof. And I've had many experiences like that. I have been forever messing with people's minds, quite sadistically, to see what I could get them to believe, and there is no limit to what you can get people to believe. People are just so easy to mislead and manipulate, it is untrue. And I spent probably the first 25 years of my life doing it, and I have all the evidence that I personally need for my own level of certainty. People will see anything if you get them into a suggestive state. Now, I'm paraphrasing you slightly. I have no desire to speak in purely scientific terms. Those are your words. Well, I do. I can't help it. I mean, aside from the definition of science, which is knowledge, so I'm speaking purely in terms of knowledge. Now, I don't mean all knowledge. I mean that knowledge that we have at the moment, that imperfect knowledge that we have at the moment. You might say, but what about tomorrow's knowledge? Well, I say that if a man says he can pick up some dust, blow on it, and birds will come out of his hands, I say that's bullshit. I say that no one can rationally defend that as a possibility. That event is impossible. That event is outside of nature, and it didn't happen, and it will never happen. In those comments, I said one thing which I will stand by to the death. When dealing with a capable philosopher, as I've said before, there's no way to win. And there are very few areas where we would discuss things and you could not put me into a corner where I would give. But there's one area where you won't get me to give at all. And that is in the following statement, which you inspired me to make in those comments and really sums it all up for me. I don't know what the truth is, but I do know that whatever it is It is not impossible